In Heidi North Bailey's Horses, we explore the story of a young girl, her younger sister, and her father as they navigate moving to the countryside to a new house after the loss of her mother. Although I'm not a young girl moving into the countryside, I enjoyed the story largely due to the many parts of the narrator and the story that I can relate to. A relatable part of the narrator's character is evident in her descriptions of the setting. Scanning the horizon, she establishes a negative stance toward the countryside, calling out the hills, boring trees, and some cows. And this stance is reaffirmed with her and her family's description as quote unquote beach people who quote lived by the sea. I relate to this especially as a Californian near the coast, and as a person who really is not interested in the scenery of the countryside. Another part of the story that I relate to is the narrator's references to code switching. Growing up, I often noticed the small nuances when it comes to social interactions. The differences in how my parents would talk to me versus my teacher or versus a family member. So I can relate to the narrator when she calls out her father for putting on a, quote, stupid old person voice whenever he talks to the real estate man. Furthermore, similar to how the narrator learned to put on a, quote, grown up face to rebuke her younger sister, I relate to learning to talk and act differently around younger family members and adults. Let's move on to the main characters in the story: the narrator, the narrator's sister, Josie, their father, and the real estate man. Josie is characterized primarily in the story in how she expresses her thoughts and emotions genuinely and sincerely. For instance, as the family arrives at the new house, Josie immediately whispers, "I don't like it here." The reader can also assume that Josie is younger than the narrator, since the narrator has to pinch her arm in an act of disapproval. Josie's and the narrator's father is characterized in the story by his implied low economic status. The narrator reveals this in her descriptions of her father's car, which has a stuck window with a broken handle. Her father's economic status is even further emphasized as the narrator contrasts him to the real estate man. The real estate man's car has leather seats and shiny electric windows, while her father's car windows are hand cranked. The real estate man was wearing a suit, while the narrator points out that she has never seen her father wear a suit. That brings us to the last and most important character of the story, the narrator. In a way, the narrator can also be contrasted to her sister Josie. While both Josie and the narrator express their dislike for the new house, Josie is able to do it openly, while the narrator cannot. For example, the narrator states that she wanted to tell her dad that they couldn't live there. It was impossible. This inability to express her dislike of the house is further seen in the narrator figuratively gluing her mouth shut, preventing, quote, all the bad things inside from coming out. A critical part of the story's narration is that it is in the first person point of view. The narrator is directly involved in the actions and events of the story, thus allowing the reader to understand the narrator's innermost thoughts and feelings, such as her dislike for the house, which was discussed earlier in the video. And because of this first person point of view, the story's message is able to be conveyed to the reader. Let's see why the point of view is essential to understanding the story's message of doing anything, even being deceitful, to bring a sense of hope in devastating situations. In the beginning of the story, the narrator's father initially has high hopes and optimism, such as when he says in a bright voice that a rather run-down wall can be painted any color. However, as the sights of the dilapidated house, compounded with the absence of his wife, get to him, his optimism declines rapidly, with him deflating like a balloon. Thus, in order to give her father a sense of hope, the narrator states that she actually loves the house and sees a place to have horses, even though throughout the entire story, she was expressing her dislike for the house. This is why the first person point of view is key to understanding the story's message. Without a first person point of view, we as the reader would not be able to know the narrator's true emotions and feelings, and would therefore assume that the narrator generally does love the house. Thus, knowing that the narrator was untruthful in order to invoke some sense of hope in her father is essential to understanding the meaning of the story. Although Horses may appear from the surface level to be just a story about moving to a new place, if we read a little more into it, we can learn how a single sentence can produce some hope out of the most desperate situations.